A reading from the devotional Morning by Morning by Charles Spurgeon. January 8, Exodus 28:38. The iniquity of the holy things. What a veil is lifted up by these words, and what a disclosure is made. It will be humbling and profitable for us to pause a while and see this sad sight. The iniquities of our public worship, its hypocrisy, formality, lukewarmness, irreverence, wandering of heart, and forgetfulness of God. What a full measure we have there. Our work for the Lord, its immolation, selfishness, carelessness, slackness, unbelief, what a mass of defilement is there. Our private devotions, their laxity, coldness, neglect, sleepiness, and vanity, what a mountain of dead earth is there. If we looked more carefully, we should find this iniquity to be far greater than appears at first sight. Dr. Payson, writing to his brother, says, "My parish, as well as my heart, very much resembles the garden of the sluggard. And what is worse, I find that very many of my desires for the amelioration of both proceed either from pride or vanity or indolence. I look at the weeds which overspread my garden and breathe out an earnest wish that they were eradicated. But why? What prompts the wish? It may be that I may walk out and say to myself, 'In what fine order is my garden kept!' This is pride. Or it may be that my neighbors may look over the wall and say, 'How finely your garden flourishes!' This is vanity. Or I may wish for the destruction of the weeds because I am weary of pulling them up. This is indolence, so that even our desires after holiness may be polluted by ill motives. Under the greenest sods, worms hide themselves. We need not look long to discover them. How cheering is the thought that when the high priest bore the iniquity of the holy things, he wore upon his brow the words, 'Holiness to the Lord.' And even so, while Jesus bears our sin, he presents before his Father's face not our unholiness, but his own holiness. Oh, for grace to view our great high priest by the eye of faith."
One of the many titles given to Jesus Christ is that of the Great High Priest. To understand this messianic title, we first must understand the role and significance of the high priest in ancient times. During the Exodus, as the Israelites were camped at the base of Mount Sinai, the Lord desired that all his children be able to enter into his presence within the walls of the temple or tabernacle. However, because of their sinfulness in creating a golden calf, God instead had the high priest take the place of Israel, becoming the intercessory on their behalf. To help symbolize his important role as a mediator and as a type of Christ, each piece of the clothing of the high priest pointed to the Messiah. The high priest wore 8 holy garments. Of these, 4 were of the same type worn by all priests, and 4 were unique to the high priest. The 4 garments worn by all priests were first, the priestly undergarments or breeches. These linen pants were made to cover the nakedness of the priests and covered them from the waist to the knees. Second was the priestly tunic or robe, which was likewise made of white linen, was seamless, and covered most of the body of the priest. Third was the priestly sash, made of white linen for the normal priest, and an embroidered sash made of gold, blue, purple, scarlet, and white for the high priest, and was used as a type of belt around the tunic or robe. Fourth is the priestly turban, bonnet, or cap, which was a long strip of white linen wrapped around the head of the priest. The 4 golden garments worn by only the high priest were, first, the priestly blue robe, which was a sleeveless and seamless robe that was about a handbreadth shorter than the white full-length robe. On the bottom of the blue robe were alternating golden bells and pomegranate-shaped tassels made of blue, purple, and scarlet wool. Second was the ephod, a richly embroidered vest or apron with 2 onyx engraved gemstones on the shoulders, on which were engraved the names of the tribes of Israel. Third was the breastplate, which had 12 different stones in gold settings fastened to the breastplate, each engraved with one of the names of the tribes of Israel. The breastplate was folded in half to create a pocket where the Urim and Thummim was stored. The fabric for both the ephod and the breastplate were woven from golden thread, blue, purple, and scarlet wool, and white linen. The breastplate was fastened on the top by gold twisted chains attached to the 2 shoulder stones, and on the bottom by blue ribbons tied to the ephod. The last of the golden garments of the high priest was the crown, worn over the front of the turban and attached to the forehead by 2 blue ribbons, the crown being inscribed with the words, "Holiness to the Lord." Each of the pieces of clothing, including their materials and colors, pointed to Jesus the Messiah, the great high priest. First, we'll discuss the 4 white linen vestments. White in the Bible represents purity, while the Hebrew word that was often used for linen means separation. Purity and separation from the world are both perfect symbols of the life of Christ. John, remembering the white seamless robe worn by the priests, tells us that at the cross, Jesus likewise wore a seamless robe. On the blue outer robe were attached alternating bells and pomegranate tassels. As the high priest would walk around, the bells would ring, reminding everyone around him that they were in the presence of the high priest, the representative of the Lord. The pomegranate in the scriptures represents fruitfulness, posterity, and prosperity, as there are literally hundreds of seeds in a single fruit. It is through the atonement of the Messiah that we all are made children of Christ and heirs of his kingdom. In the scriptures, the forehead represents what a person's thoughts dwell on, and therefore what he loves or desires. For the same reason, the Mosaic high priest wore an engraved gold signet on his forehead that read, "Holiness to the Lord." This was a reminder that his thoughts should always be holy, with the result that his actions would follow suit. Perhaps the most significant and expensive part of the high priest's clothing was the ephod and the breastplate. According to the Bible, the stones on the 2 shoulders, engraved with the 12 tribes of Israel, were to represent that the high priest was to symbolically bear or carry Israel upon his shoulders at all times. The 12 stones on the breastplate, likewise, represented that he was to carry Israel against his heart. As Christ atoned in the Garden of Gethsemane and died on the cross of Calvary, he literally carried all of the world on his shoulders and against his heart. The blue robe, the ephod, and the breastplate were all made of linen and wool, and of the same 5 colors: gold, blue, purple, scarlet, and white. Linen again represents separation from the world, while wool can be connected to the sheep that were used in so many of the temple sacrifices. Gold in the scriptures represents wealth, power, the celestial realm, and the divine. Blue represents all things heavenly, being the color of the sky. The priest's outer robe, being entirely blue, emphasized the fact that his authority was of heavenly origin, and his life was the typifying of God and Christ. The color purple represents royalty, power, wealth, and majesty. Producing purple dye in ancient times was extremely costly and difficult, meaning that only the wealthiest could afford to wear the color purple. It is interesting to note that Christ, according to Mark and John, was clothed in a purple robe by the soldiers before his crucifixion in an effort to mock him as the King of the Jews. The color scarlet, or red, represents sin, mortality, death, and resurrection. In the same account of the mocking soldiers, Matthew tells us that the robe was scarlet. In addition, the book of Revelation depicts Christ at his second coming, wearing a robe dipped in blood, making it the color red. As we already mentioned, white represents purity and typifies the type of life that Christ lived. Just as the 5 colors were fully interwoven and united into one single piece of cloth, so too the attributes of Christ, typified by each of the colors, were combined into one to demonstrate the saving grace of Christ, the number 5 representing God's grace in the Scriptures. Each attribute on its own is powerful, but only when they are all interwoven together is the true power of the atonement realized. The fact that the 12 precious stones representing Israel were fastened to the breastplate, which symbolizes the attributes of Christ, teaches us that we, as Israel, are each bound to Christ and made one with him because of his perfect life and infinite atonement. As Paul wrote, "Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted, like as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy, and find grace to help in time of need."